And here we are on the Gonzo Experience podcast with the guy that got me into podcasting, the great, lovable Stephen Woessner. Stephen, welcome to the Gonzo Experience. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, brother. Thanks for the invitation and looking forward to our chat.
Listen, I kid you not, that you are seriously one of my favorite humans in the world. You're such a great guy, a great soul, just a real stand-up person. Would do anything for a friend. And for that, I love you. And you got me into podcasting. So I mean, that's just like icing on the cake. And I really appreciate that. And it was in October of 2016 when I first launched. And you and Eric Jensen got me started over at Predictive ROI, and I really appreciate it. So here I am, and you've been on I think this is the third time. I know it's the third time actually. I think about it, that you've been on my podcast, starting with the Avanti podcast, and now on the Gonzo Experience. Really want to welcome you to the show, and I just want to kind of do an update with you and see where you're at, what you got going on. But first, and foremost, with the Gonzo Experience, we really try to get raw and real, right? And as you say on your podcast, get behind the curtain, right? And, behind the smile, and hear about one, and I'm sure you have many as I do. One experience of yours that really rocked your world as an entrepreneur. Maybe had you question, what the hell am I doing? And when we first met at that Darren Hardy event, I believe, where are we, 2020? Was it 2012, I want to say?
Yep, August of 2012.
Yeah, we met at a Darren Hardy 3-day mastermind event, the High Performance Forum. And you announced at that event that you were planning this great, I believe, 5-day event at the Ritz. And if I remember correctly, it was a pretty hefty price tag for admission. Was it $6,000 to $9,000, something like that, right? And
Yep.
And we all looked at you like, okay, God bless you. He must know what he's doing. He's very confident. But that event turned out to be a real turning point in your life, right? Where, there's the metaphor of the boomerang, where you had to go backwards in order to propel forwards, right? So share with the Gonzo listeners about that experience, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Happy to share. And I lovingly refer to that now as my $2 million mistake. And so just for context, for numbers first, and then we can slice it apart however you think would be helpful for your audience. But, I had personally signed a contract with the Ritz-Carlton in Orlando. So Ritz-Carlton Grand Lakes, Orlando. It's a 425 room hotel. And I signed a contract for 3 nights at 350 rooms a night. So essentially 1,000 room nights. And you're right, the price point for the event was anywhere between $6,000 to $9,000 if someone bought a general admission ticket or if they purchased a VIP ticket. It was all inclusive, include the room, food, so room and board plus the event. The only thing we didn't cover was their transportation to Orlando. Anyway,
thank God.
Right. And so when you consider the room contract, food, entertainment, all of that, it had an operating budget of $2 million. And so that was the opportunity. I mean, that was the operating budget. So when we eventually had to cancel the event, because when we opened the doors to sell tickets, we sold a grand total of 3. So as you might imagine, we sell 3 seats and you've got 350 seats in a ballroom and you only sold 3. That's either going to be a really intimate meeting or not very profitable. And so, and we had some great A-listers. You mentioned Darren. Darren was going to be one of our speakers. He was on our board of advisors at the time. Gary Vaynerchuk was going to be a speaker. Avinash Kaushik from Google, Don Yeager, Scott McCain, a real A-list lineup of speakers and myself. So getting to share the stage with those big names. But we couldn't sell tickets and ultimately made that mistake because I didn't take some of Darren's advice. So anyway, we lost the $2 million opportunity, hence this is my $2 million mistake. But then also when you cancel an event at the Ritz-Carlton, they're like, oh gosh, that's too bad. Well, here's your invoice for the rooms that weren't slept in and the broccoli that wasn't eaten. Here's an invoice for $160,000 on top of the $40,000 in deposits we'd already made and paid. So you put all of that together, plus our operating expenses to run that event. It was about $200,000 sucked right out of our business early on, which was very expensive. And as you might imagine, quite painful. So happy to go into all the different elements of that story, however you think would be helpful, but that's kind of the high level. $2 million and $200,000 in cash, real cash, not fake, fictitious cash, real cash.
Where does so the 200,000? Where does the 2 million come in?
So the $2 million was, had we sold the seats, we would have had a $2 million revenue opportunity. We wouldn't have netted $2 million, to be clear, but between the expense of the event and a revenue opportunity, you total all of that together, it's $2 million. So, I mean, the hotel contract itself was, I think, about $500,000, if I remember correctly. And then, everything else that went along with it. So it would have been a very expensive event, a great opportunity, but in hindsight, silly for a company of our size at the time to plan such an audacious event.
Now, have you done an event since then? Have you said, all right, like if I were to do something differently, planning my next event, this is what I would do now?
Yeah, well, first I would listen to, I would listen to Darren's advice.
What did Darren say? Don't do it.
It wasn't that per se. He would say yes, but it wasn't that per se. But what it was, because again, he was on our board, so I was spending time with him every single month, either in person or in our mentorship calls. And the question that he asked me time and time again, which is the perfect question, was, who's going to come to this thing? And I said, well, business owners. He said, well, why? And I said, well, because you're here, and Gary's here, and Avinash is here, and Don, and Scott. And he's like, that's dumb. That doesn't make any sense. Why is somebody going to spend $8,000 to come and listen to us over the course of 3 days? I'm like, well, because it's also at the Ritz-Carlton. He's like, Steven, a business owner is not going to spend $8,000 on themselves, this lavish 3-day event at the Ritz-Carlton that you're envisioning, if you can't get really clear on the who. And he said, and a business owner is not going to send their second in command or one of their tech people or a marketing person. They're not going to spend $8,000 for that person. Not that that person's, a bad person or anything like that, but if they're going to spend $8,000, they're probably going to spend it on themselves. And if they don't get the value proposition of the event, they're going to be confused. And as much as I would argue with him back and forth, and some of those conversations did get pretty dynamic, at the end of the day, I could never really answer his question with clarity. And he was 100% right to be asking that question, as a good mentor would. And I could not answer it. And because I couldn't answer it, it cost us $200,000.
So, and now, one of the things I'm so impressed with your character is you could have said, all right, sorry, Ritz-Carlton, I'm folding that business. I'm going, quote unquote, bankrupt, and you're out this money, right? Can't do anything because they, if it was a S corp or a C corp, or they're separate, they can't come after you or your house. But you, being the honorable guy, you kept the business and you paid them, right? I think it was like week by week, $1,000, something like that, right? So
I paid it all back. We had to negotiate it out because, again, we're not some big Fortune 500 company who can stroke a check for a couple $100,000. And so after some negotiating back and forth, it's like, guys, don't charge me $60,000 for broccoli. We haven't even selected the menus yet. Don't charge me $60,000 for food. Anyway, so we're able to negotiate out some costs. But you're right. At the end of the day, I paid them $1,000 a month for 4 years. And then I part of that agreement was then also a balloon payment of $53,000 at the
Wow.
end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so again, yeah, sure, that was a little bit more palatable, $1,000 a month for 4 years. That's $48,000 sucked out of the business, and then a balloon payment of 53 grand. I
Yeah.
mean, that's for most small businesses, that's a ton of cash.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. For anybody, I mean, I know billionaires that don't want to pay that for something, right? So yeah, absolutely. But you did it. And one of the lessons there for me was not only did you do it for your own integrity, but your team, your employees saw that, right? Like Eric, et cetera. We talked about this, and that endeared them to you even more. Like, wow, if this is the way he treats the Ritz Carlton, who we could easily just say bye legally. If that's the way he treats them, imagine how he's going to treat us, right? The character, the integrity. So I think that was a great business lesson. Not only what to do in a crisis, how to handle it the right way, but also like people are watching, right? Reputation is king, and you could lose it in a minute, but also you could really, kind of, savor it for life in a minute too, And so you made the right call. I admire that very much. So you learned, and then you continued with your business predictive ROI, that digital marketing, et cetera. Because I know you so well, I want you to skip to years later. You started a podcast, and you're sitting on your front porch. And if I remember correctly, you were kind of hit with that lightning bolt of an idea to change the course of your professional life, and it still is where you are today. So can you share that moment with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And that was also like in the throes of, I mean, we had figured out sort of the payment plan, if you will, with the Ritz, and we were making those payments, and it was a process of being able to go through that. So it took some time. So by, let's say the spring of 2015, we're starting to pay all that back, and it was painful. And then ironically, our business at the time, Predictive, was really, we prided ourselves on being a generalist, a generalist digital marketing shop that drove leads and sales for businesses in a predictable way. Eric and I come back from visiting one of our clients on site, doing a 2-day intensive on site. Didn't really go very well. And so, now we're in jeopardy of losing one of our largest clients. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. We're getting all this pressure from, the Ritz to make all these payments and stuff, which we were doing, and that's putting constraint on our business. Now we have the hard reality of we might lose one of our biggest clients, and that means that we're overstaffed, right? And so we're going to have to make a pivot in the business pretty quickly. And so you're right. It was May of 2015 where I was sitting there thinking, we're going to have to do something, and we're going to have to do something really dramatic in order to turn the business around. So I sent an email to my team, and I said, okay, in 30 days, we're going to launch a daily show. We're going to call it Onward Nation. And I'm going to interview the very best business owners that I can get a hold of. It's going to be awesome. People are going to hear it. They're going to want to pick up the phone and call us to do their stuff. That was the strategy, which obviously is not a strategy, but that was the strategy. And to my team's credit, we knew zero about podcasting at the time. I owned a headset. I'd been a guest on Entrepreneur on Fire. That was about it. Mm-hmm. And to their credit, we went from zero to doing it pretty well in 30 days. We launched the show. We're now at almost episode 1,000. And it has been one of the best things we've ever done for our business. Onward Nation has driven about $4 million in revenue into predictive ROI. Wow. And because we've had the good fortune of spending time with great guests like yourself and others. But it was a very radical move. Looking back on it, it's like, what in the world were we thinking? Mm-hmm. But, the Lord works in mysterious ways.
So he sure does. And I think you were hit by some entrepreneurial lightning bolts at that moment, right? And but then, so not only were you doing your own podcast, but then someone said, hey, love your podcast. Can you do one for me? And you're
right.
Like,
and that's where the $4 million comes from. You're right. Because our guests on the show, one in particular started this process. My co-author, actually Drew McClellan, in our new book, Sell with Authority, but years ago, 5-6 years ago, whenever it was, he said to me, he goes, "Hey, could you do that for me?" And I'm like, "Do what for you?" And he's like, "Oh my gosh, seriously, could you launch a podcast for me?" And I'm like, "Yes, we can. Absolutely, we can."
You
And
betcha.
then, right. And then a couple months later, after we launched his show, he's like, "Look, my show is awesome. Your show's awesome. Why are you not doing this for more people?" And I'm like, who could we do this for?
Right.
He's like, "Seriously, get in touch with your guests and see what they say." And many of them said yes. And we are very grateful for that.
I was one of them.
Yes.
That's how I came in the family. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And now that's the core of your business now, right? As far as producing podcasts for people.
Well, it was, and I say was because one of the things that we learned along the way over the last 5-6 years is that's awesome being able to help a business owner like Dave launch a podcast, but there's a bigger strategy behind it, or needs to be. There's a bigger strategy of, okay, how do you take each and every episode and slice and dice it into smaller content so your client is not focused on one channel, but they're truly channel agnostic. Then how do you take that content and build out the sales funnel? How do you make sure that they have right fit prospects in their sales funnel all the time? How do you help them monetize their content? How do you take a podcast, turn it into a video series? How do you take a podcast and a video series, turn it into a best-selling book? How do you take all of that foundational content, turn it into a research study that their niche audience would really love? And so where Drew and I really then took this effort along with our team was working really hard of, okay, it's more than a podcast. It's more than a video series. It's more than research. It's more than a book. It's more than all of these things. We're really helping clients plant their flag of authority, like become known as the expert in a niche. And then the result outcome of that is helping them fill their sales pipeline so they can monetize their content. So anyway, do we still produce a lot of podcasts? Of course we do. We're up to like 10,000 episodes now. Awesome. But more importantly, we're helping a client fill their sales pipeline with right fit prospects and build their business.
Yeah, that's great. So as you call it the Trojan horse, right? A podcast done the right way. Assuming you're providing really good content and it's interesting, can be a great marketing sales tool at the end of the day, right?
Agreed.
And people on your guests, you didn't even mean to sell something, but guests are like, "Hey, what do you do again? Can you help me with that?"
Yeah, and recognizing too that it may take a day or a decade, right?
Yeah.
So the Trojan horse of sales, interviewing your dream prospects, as guests on your show or your video or whatever. Yeah. That's a great strategy, but it turns into a schmutzy strategy if after you turn off the record button, that person then says, "Hey, how's about then it feels yucky."
Right. Then it's
so
cheating,
it's
yeah.
right. It's right. Exactly. So then it's about having a strategy downstream that, continues to nurture that relationship and grow over time. And it may take months, it may take years, but eventually, if you do things correctly, you'll get an at-bat because you've earned it.
Yep. No, it's fantastic. So before we go, Stephen, I want to talk about. So I know you've written. I believe, if I'm correct, you've written 4 books. Is that right?
Yep.
And in the recent one you said is with Drew McClellan, and that one is called Sell with Authority.
Yes.
And that's on I imagine Amazon and all that great stuff. But give us the high level view of that book.
Sure. And that really goes into the strategy of helping a business owner plant their flag of authority by really paying attention to the 3 essentials, which is getting clear around their niche and really pushing them to go narrow, gaining clarity around their point of view, why they do what it is that they do and who they do it for, and importantly, who they don't do it for. And then 3 is helping them not be a one-trick pony. Right. So if they're going to have a podcast, that's fine. But how do they have a channel agnostic strategy so they're findable, so that every time one of their prospects meets them someplace or sends them an email or whatever, they hear them say, "Gosh, Dave, every time I turn around, there you are being helpful."
Yeah.
And then how does that strategy then turn into a business development plan? Right. So it's not just about the content. It's about the slicing and dicing all of it into an actual sales funnel.
Yeah.
So that it's not a show, It's not an episode. Every single piece of content matters in the grand scheme of filling the sales pipeline with right fit prospects and helping them grow their business.
Yeah. And then you guys do a weekly, is like a webinar or kind of just a hangout where you're helping people.
Yeah, so we call that, probably for the lack of a better term, like a weekly Q&A. I guess the official title is How to Fill Your Sales Pipeline. And you're right. So we have between 50 and 60 people who come every week. And Eric Jensen and I, my business partner, we don't have some sort of sales agenda. We start off like the first 5-10 minutes with hey, this is our latest insight, or this is our latest experiment. This was the data. Last week, we shared what we call the spear email. And then we actually gave them a template. Take it, use it. I hope it serves you well. And then we spend the next 45 minutes answering questions in a very transparent, genuine way. And so far it's been pretty helpful. And what's interesting is there's no sales pitch, nothing. There's not a mention about what it is that Predictive does. And what's been awesome is that afterwards we hear things like, guys, that's some of the best training I've received in years. How could you guys help me grow my business? Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because you become a helpful resource, right? And then it's like the good looking guy doesn't have to ask for a date, right?
I've never been in that situation, but okay.
I'm with you. Listen, I grew up looking like Screech. I was Screech's twin. So I definitely had to rely on my quote unquote humor, So.
That's awesome.
And then I also want to mention your other book that I had the honor of being in. Thank you for including me in your book, but Podcasting for Profit. And that came out, I want to say about 3 years ago, which is another
August of 2017. And oddly, I shouldn't say oddly, it is a good book. We're still selling a bunch of copies of it, which is great. So it was written to be very helpful, but yes, thank you for being one of our case studies.
Yeah. Well, it's selling so much because I'm always talking about it. I'm recommending it to everybody I know. So.
Well, that may be why, it was hilarious. I mean, the other day, Christine, my wife, comes into the kitchen and she's, holding this envelope from HarperCollins, the publisher. And she's like, is this something you need? And I said, well, probably it might be like a report or something like that. And open it up. There's a royalty check in it. And I'm like,
beautiful.
Awesome.
I love it. I love it. You're like, one of these TV stars that continue to get royalty checks for the rest of their life, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm not buying a small Caribbean island on the royalty checks. It's a niche book, but we wrote it to be like the compendium, like a super helpful guide, and it's served its purpose.
That's great. Well, Stephen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Steve, everybody, go check them out. It's predictiveroi.com, correct?
Yes.
And how else, if they want to get in touch with you, Stephen, how else do they get in touch with you?
LinkedIn's the best source. So hit me up on LinkedIn. We'd love to connect with you there. And then when you do, we will likely send you an invitation to join us for the weekly Q&A. They're always 100% free. And like I said, there's no sales pitch. We're just there to teach and share, and you get to hang out with other smart business owners like yourselves. And so come join us.
Awesome. And if anybody wants a personal introduction to Stephen, I'd be happy to do that. Throw me an email, david@thegonzoexperience.com. Be happy to do that. Stephen, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I've loved being a part of your journey along the way. You've been involved in what I'm doing. I've been involved in what you're doing. I've been to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and stayed at your house, and you brought me to that great steak place. And I mean, we even worked out together, right? We punched some iron together. So you're a great friend, a great person. I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to do next. And I appreciate everything that you're doing to make the world a better place.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. And that was fun when you came to La Crosse, and because you and I were speaking at the same event on behalf of Misty Lown and her More Than Just Great Dancing group. That was so much fun. It was lovely to have you at the house. And I look forward to us being able to do that again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stephen, thank you so much. I wish you continued massive success. I want you to stay awesome. And everybody, do me a favor. If you like this podcast, which I hope you love it, subscribe and just download every episode, rate and review the whole works. And you can always find more episodes on your favorite podcast app and also thegonzoexperience.com. Thank you, listeners. Honored to have you here. And thanks again, Stephen. I wish you the best.
You're very welcome, brother. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.